If you want to have a happy and fulfilling life, invest in community building, invest in building relationships.
Hello there, it's me, Steve Mellor, and welcome in to Growth Ready, the podcast that allows high performers to reveal the reality behind what it means to ready yourself for growth, the personal and professional challenges along the growth journey, while also allowing the high performance executive coach in me to satisfy his curiosity toward what drives optimal performance. On this episode, we welcome in founder of Venture for Canada and author of The Uncertainty Advantage, Scott Stirrett. And having served 10,000 young professionals over the past decade, Scott knows that where uncertainty lies, the greatest opportunity for growth lies too. The question is, are we ready to lean in and go into the unknown? Hey guys, as we get started here with the episode, I want to just take 1 minute of your time to make a request for you to subscribe and rate the show. For our show to be easily discovered by other potential listeners, we need our current listeners, that's you, to take the time to not only subscribe, but to also rate the show. Whether you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, whatever platform of choice, there are typically ways to be rating the show. So go ahead and click something like that 5th star and be sure to take that additional time to leave a comment or two about why it is you enjoy listening to the Growth Ready podcast. Your efforts on this will allow our show to be more discoverable, which means we're going to find more listeners and continue to have that significant impact on the community of human performance and personal development that I know you are all benefiting from by being listeners to this show. Please go ahead, take the time, subscribe, rate the show today. Hey, and while you're at it, why don't you share it with a few people as well? I appreciate you guys. Let's get to the interview. Hello and welcome back into the most recent installment of Growth Ready. I am excited to be welcoming someone in north of the border today, up in Toronto, Canada. Scott Stirrett is joining me, and as I was just sharing with Scott before we press record, so excited to learn more about his story. I know you will be too, but before we get into all of your background and the phenomenal insight I have no doubt you'll be sharing with us today, Scott, I would love for you to answer what I ask everybody to answer to start us off. And what does it mean to you to be growth ready?
To me, to be growth ready is to embrace the uncertainty that exists in the world. I think we live in radically uncertain times and this is because of a variety of different factors, including the rise of AI, political instability, increasing global interconnectedness. And to be growth ready is to learn to not fear uncertainty, but to embrace it. And the great thing is that your ability to cope with uncertainty is a teachable skill. You can become better at thriving at uncertainty over time.
What you already have, as the coach in me, you already have my complete attention of just, not only are you suggesting this notion of embracing over fear, but this is actually a trait that it's not something we inherit. We can actually learn it. We can actually develop it and be taught it over time. Before we maybe go there, I would love for you to just go to the initial part of your response first and talk to me a little bit about what is it you're seeing today in the work that you do that makes you feel as though uncertainty is as prevalent as you certainly make it seem.
The biggest thing that I see that holds people back at the beginning of their careers is fear of uncertainty. And in my context of my work at Venture for Canada, we've helped over 10,000 people launch their careers across Canada. And I've seen firsthand that fear of uncertainty holds people back in terms of perfectionism, in terms of fear of taking risks.
Mm-hmm.
And the more that you learn to embrace the uncertainty in the world, the more that you can begin to capitalize on all of the opportunities that are out there.
Yeah, and so you're alluding there straight away to the work that you're doing with Venture for Canada, and it's such a phenomenal mission and movement. From the information I've read about it, we're now about 12 years into it, I think, and 12 years in, 60 million, 80 million raised, I think, for young professionals to go and do what it is they need to go and do in this world. And here you are coming at it from their perspective in the way you're responding to this question. But here I am working with my demographic of what I do today as an executive coach is probably an average age of high 40s, low 50s. And it is just as prevalent in that demographic as it is in the demographic that you're alluding to as well. And I think it's for that very reason that you just mentioned there. It's if we don't embrace it at that early phase of life, do we ever actually realize the importance of embracing it? And or when do we get to that point where it's just like life and our careers and our situations kind of hits us over the head and says, you should have embraced this a lot sooner, but hey, now's maybe a good time to do it. Is this something, obviously you're working with this younger demographic, but from your own perspective, like how have you maybe noticed this in your life, or how have you noticed it far beyond this demographic that you're typically working with in these young professionals?
Fear of uncertainty, it is something that can hold anyone back at any point in their lives and careers. And the reason being is because fear of uncertainty is baked into our DNA.
Hmm.
That there are many studies that show that the majority of people would prefer to know a bad outcome rather than an uncertain outcome.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because when we were cave people wandering around, uncertainty often meant death or that we weren't going to eat for 2 weeks. It was really a matter of life and death. So when we face uncertain situations now where the stakes aren't necessarily as high in the vast majority of cases, we automatically often go to the worst possible outcome. And that makes us really fear uncertain situations. So when you think of people who are older in career, the same challenges exist.
Mm-hmm.
The good news is that regardless of your age, you can learn to develop a better relationship with uncertainty. But I agree with you. I think if you start to build your uncertainty muscles in your 20s, you're going to be put in a better position as you go into your 30s and 40s and 50s and later. And the reality is that there are different uncertainties that we face at every point in our lives, whether that is having children or launching a business or having a parent fall ill and pass away. Certainly, young people face a lot of uncertainties in identity formation, entering the workforce. But there are other uncertainties that other people face at other points in their life that are equally uncertain.
Yeah, and it is something that I was just sharing with you before we press record. Again, having just met with and worked with close to 100 MBA students just yesterday, and I actually asked the room, is there anybody here in their 30s or older? And nobody was. Everybody was in their 20s. And so I just sort of looked at the room and helped them understand that they have so much change coming their way, and the world itself is changing every single day. And I think one thing that we sometimes take for granted, those of us that aren't in our 20s anymore, that are a few decades on from that age, is that while we can benefit from this highly evolving, highly adaptive world in terms of the technology and all the things that are going on, the rate of change is something that is so unusual. When you go back to those caveman years, right, that you were just alluding to, like cavemen were not having to deal with change at the rate that we're having to deal with change. And so I would have to assume, just from your experiencing, how much of that is actually playing a part in just the challenge, I suppose, with getting more comfortable with this embracing of uncertainty, considering that change has never been more prevalent than it is today.
Certainly, there have been uncertainties that have existed in all eras, but I think it's the rapid change of today that makes the world different. I think of a situation like World War II in like 1930, 1940, very uncertain time for the world and for a lot of people. But I think what's different about now compared to then is the rate of technological change and the change also in cultural norms. That even if you were to go back more in human history, if someone was born in 1750 and 1780, the cultural norms would have changed, but not necessarily in a massive way.
Mm-hmm.
Versus today, the difference between 2025 and 1995 is pretty significant across a wide range of the kind of issues. Even a lot of jobs that exist today. If you were to say social media manager as a job to someone in 1970, they
Right.
would it would blow their mind. They'd be like, "What?
They'd have a lot of questions. They'd have a lot of questions for you. Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
full-time job."
Yeah.
And the challenge as well as the opportunity for young people today, as well as for all people, is to learn to embrace the rapidly changing nature of our world,
Mhm.
which means that we can be left behind more easily, but it also
Mm.
means that there are more opportunities that are available than ever before. And in some ways, it's more important to reinvent yourself than at any point in history. So we live in anxiety-inducing, but also I think really exciting times.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's get to the teaching part of this now. I really want to learn more about some of this work that you're doing and maybe how this could be teachable to those far outside of their 20s, because I think we have maybe a handful. When I look at the stats every single month, I think we have a few folks in their 20s. So I appreciate you guys tuning in, but for the most part we have lots of folks further down in their careers that are listening to this. I'm just curious, if someone's listening to you right now and they're like, gosh, Scott, like you are speaking to me at this point. Like I've never been good with change. I feel like everything around me keeps changing. I feel my anxiety kicking in consistently because of all this change. What might be some of those maybe initial approaches that one can take to simply better experiencing and handling that change?
In my book, The Uncertainty Advantage, I go through 6 core pillars of advice. And those include first, the importance of self-compassion. That in a world that changes really quickly and where your plans can get thrown out the window and adverse things can happen to you quite quickly, it's important to speak to yourself in a kind way. I was speaking at an event last night about this, and a young person came up and was really asking me a lot of questions about what does being self-compassionate mean? What does
Hmm.
speaking to yourself in a nice way? And what I said to him is, it means speaking to yourself like you'd speak to a friend when they're going through a tough time, rather than belittling yourself or being really hard on yourself. The second pillar of the book is the importance of anti-fragility. So essentially looking at how do you learn to not just tolerate uncertainty or challenge, but you become better in the face of a challenge. And it comes from an investment concept called that was coined by Nassim Taleb, where he wrote a book called Anti-Fragile on this topic.
Hmm.
And a lot of people, I think, just think about challenge or hardship in the context of resilience, but it's important to think about how do you become better in the face of challenges. And one of the ways you can do that is through building your risk-taking muscles, pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, doing one thing every day to build up your risk muscles. Because the more that you are good at risk-taking, the more you are good at embracing uncertainty. Because inherent in risk-taking means you're embracing an uncertain situation.
Hmm.
A third pillar of the book is the importance of adaptability. So thinking more about what is your mission statement, what is your vision statement for life, what are your core values, and letting those guide you rather than setting really rigid plans. Major issue I see a lot of people make in doing their career planning is they create way too rigid of career plans,
Hmm.
when instead they should be thinking about, why do I exist? What's my purpose on this world?
Hmm.
And then you create adaptable plans, because in an uncertain world, your best laid plans can get thrown at pretty quickly. The fourth pillar of the uncertainty advantage is the importance of an entrepreneurial mindset, which is essentially the ability to identify and act upon opportunities to create value for others. So identify, that means reading a wide range of content, talking to a wide range of different people, being able to connect dots that other people can't see. And act means you are going and running experiments, you're doing side hustles. And an entrepreneurial mindset is important for everyone, not just founders, but also for people who are in big corporations.
Hmm.
And in a world that is changing really rapidly, it's more important than ever before to foster this entrepreneurial mindset, because opportunities are emerging at a higher velocity than in the past. The fifth pillar of the uncertainty advantage is the importance of generalist skills.
Hmm.
So skills that can help you across a variety of different domains. They can include collaboration, time management, And I believe that in a world where AI will make technical skills less important, and we're already seeing this a little bit in terms of the decrease in demand for software engineering jobs, I think it's these generalist skills that you can apply across a wide variety of job types that will help give you the flexibility to adapt in a changing world. If you're really narrowed in as a specialist and all of a sudden AI makes your kind of domain irrelevant, then you're putting yourself in a challenging situation in a changing world. You want to be able to increase the options that are available to you and develop transferable skills that can help you thrive in a variety of roles.
Mm.
And the final pillar of the uncertainty advantage is professional network building.
Mm.
And that is fostering a network that is both wide and deep. Wide in the sense that you have a large number of broader connections that you engage with that are more of acquaintances. And one of the most cited sociology papers of the last 70 years is Mark Granovetter's The Strength of Weak Ties, where he found that most people find jobs through their acquaintances, not through their really good friends.
Yeah.
So if you want to thrive in your career, you need to foster a wide network of contacts. But often there's this false choice where people say, oh, well, you either need a wide network or a deep one. I argue that in an age of uncertainty, you need both. You need a deep network because in a world where things can turn against you really quickly, deep, meaningful relationships are important for socio-emotional support. And those are the people who will guide you, who will provide advice, and both are really important. And lastly, that is also important to think about how can you give first to others rather than develop a network that is extractive.
Yeah.
So be a giver, but in an efficient way that doesn't burn you out. So the 6 core pillars of advice are intended to work together. I think that if you're doing network building and general skills, et cetera, it's combining all 6 of them together in a synergistic way that you can build a life and career that lets you thrive in uncertain times.
I love all of those pillars. I think that, and again, as you're talking through it, I'm thinking about my own experience. I'm thinking about so many people in my world, and where maybe the pillar is prevalent and where the pillar is lacking. But I love that you're able to help us all see there at the end of explaining the 6 that they very much are intertwined. They very much are working off of one another. I think this would be one of those things where you can see, hey, if I'm doing 4 out of 6 of these, like, hey, I'm probably very good at being able to have this advantage in life when it comes to dealing with uncertainty. However, we should be aspiring for all 6 and not only to use all 6, but to find ways to move between the 6 as
Yeah.
well. And something that you said there as well is this notion of the risk-taking muscle. And I always appreciate when guests frame things through muscles. It just immediately helps someone listening and be like, okay, if that muscle is non-existent or it's very weak right now, how might I just start to strengthen it? And I think I would love, maybe just from your own experience, of how you've gone from, just being aware that you could be better at taking risk, and how you made and took some of those initial steps towards simply training that risk muscle a little more. Like, what does an example of maybe someone using that risk muscle more on a day-to-day basis look like?
I'll share an example from my life where I launched a little side hustle in Toronto,
Mm.
separate from Venture for Canada. And it's called Toronto Food Adventures. And we do history and food tours that are around 3 or 4 hours in the Junction neighborhood of Toronto. We sell tickets via TripAdvisor and Viator. And I only do these tours maybe 2, 3 times a year. But they're a great opportunity where I meet people from all across the world who buy these
Yeah.
tickets.
Yeah.
I take them to different restaurants. I've become a historical expert in this really specific neighborhood in Toronto. And it got me out of my comfort zone of just meeting with completely random people from different walks of life, connecting these people together, because there's
Hmm.
often 6 to 10 people on a tour. And I share this because I think it's really relatable that there's all of us had different opportunities to do little things that get us out of our comfort zone. And for me, going to meet a bunch of strangers and touring them around, restaurants in Toronto and telling them about local history was getting out of my comfort zone.
Yeah, yeah. I might have to, follow up with you on that another time. Mainly because my wife and I are avid travelers and food junkies, so that you could be checking both those boxes for us. But I love that example for so many reasons. The one that really just kind of struck me straight away when you start telling me that is that at some point Scott has had this awareness of this idea, and I would have to assume that when you've had the idea at first to now go to maybe some of these pillars that you presented here, at first I would have to assume that when you come up with an idea like that, you're not just running towards it and you're immediately implementing it, that you're maybe practicing that self-compassion straight away. It's just like I can almost detect a version of you, or certainly detect anybody who's coming up with an idea. I know I've been guilty of this. You have the idea, you think it's great, and what do? You immediately start finding every excuse in the book for why it would not work, and you tell yourself why you should not do it. And to your point earlier, that because you don't know how it's going to go, you immediately go to the uncertainty, as opposed to, well, what if there's one great reason for doing this and I can just find a way of focusing more on that one reason to do it versus these 85 reasons that naturally I can just immediately come up with. I'm just curious how you maybe took it from the idea, the concept itself, and maybe spoke to yourself through that process to bring it into a reality.
There were a few things I did. I think the first is that I went on a bunch of food tours in Toronto in different neighborhoods, and I saw that this is a really like viable side hustle to do. Lots of people pay for these tours. The second thing I did was I became an expert in this neighborhood, the Junction's local history. I read 2 books about the neighborhood. I did exhaustive online searches of like pretty much every article that's ever been written about this neighborhood. And I ended up becoming an expert where I felt confident in the product that I was selling.
Mm.
I 3 did a lot of food research and ate at a lot of places in this neighborhood, of which I might have
That's my
eaten.
kind of research right there. I like that. I like that.
Exactly. So I did that, and that was great. And then I felt I knew a lot about the restaurants.
Mm.
And then I said, okay, I'm going to put up some a listing on TripAdvisor, and let's see how it goes. And
Mm-hmm.
I started it actually in like February 2020, so not a good time. There were like no signups. But then randomly in like summer 2020, I had my first purchase from somebody,
There you go.
and we toured a family of 4 like around the neighborhood, and then we got our first 5-star Google or 5-star TripAdvisor review.
Uh-huh.
And like many things, TripAdvisor reviews really uh, govern how many tickets then you end up selling.
Sure.
And it, my response, hopefully to the listener, is to impart that there are many different like steps how you build things. They're gradual. This is just a little side venture, but when I
Mm-hmm.
think about venture for Canada, things are built gradually over time. I think one of the biggest
Mm-hmm.
mistakes a lot of people can make in their careers, particularly young people, because they have a shorter kind of time horizon of experiences, is they overestimate what they can do in 3 years, and they underestimate what they can do in 10.
Mm-hmm.
And in the early days of Venture for Canada, I was really frustrated because I thought, why haven't I achieved all these things in year 1, 2, 3? And then over 10 years, over almost 12 years, I've achieved more than what I initially set out to do. The point being is it takes a long time to often build something significant. And it's little tiny steps, little risks, day in, day out, that you gradually build something that is significant.
Yeah.
Very almost never you're going to build something significant in the span of a couple of days or weeks.
Yeah, I mean, you're now speaking to the mission of our show, which I really appreciate, and helping people see that. And I really appreciate how you framed it, because I think the 3 year and the 10 year perspective is such a normal perspective for people to go to. Sometimes we go even sooner than that, right? We want something by the end of the year, by the end of the month, and sometimes we just realize how unrealistic we're being. But at the same time, anyone who's stepping maybe into an entrepreneurship or a change in their career, they've decided to shift in some way, shape, or form. Even if they're staying where they are and they love what they're doing, they've just decided that they want to do more of it, or they want to be more successful at it. And they start to envision where they want to be in 3 years. And to your point, they get a whiteboard out, they start dreaming, and things get really big really quick. But then suddenly, if you turned around and said, well, what if you were to have that and maybe just a little bit more in 10 years? How would you feel about that? And turns out here you are a perfect living example of that. but you now look back more than 10 years later and you go, wow, I could never have imagined. I literally couldn't imagine, because I didn't imagine it would be as big as it is. And yet here we are. It is even bigger than I anticipated it being. And it makes me now want to go more to that second pillar, that anti-fragility pillar that you spoke about. If this idea of growing through hardship, growing through the difficult times, growing through uncertainty, and I think you use that word, getting better. And so it's like this idea of getting better through the challenges and the uncertainty. Let's go now more to those folks that you're familiar working with, those young professionals. How are you starting to work with them through those times when they know that, hey, I'm in a moment of uncertainty. I'm in a moment where I know I need to take risk, and I'm having a hard time identifying where I'm getting better, because I think that's the part where that can almost seem a little less tangible. It's not because sometimes it's not. Just to allude to your, I think it was the fifth pillar, the generalist skills. Like, it's hard to measure how we're getting more collaborative or how we're working on some of these softer skills. And yet I can hear through that second pillar that maybe that is exactly where we're potentially improving during those adverse times. So help us, our listeners, understand, like, how do we know we're getting better at something when we're going through something? Or how are you maybe communicating with these young professionals on the ways in which they can identify and notice the ways they're getting better?
Two different points. The first is that there is no learning without reflection,
Mm.
and that you need to build in a regular reflection practice into your life. I talk about this in the book, and building in time to every day to reflect. And a lot of the time, sometimes that's before I go to bed. I don't necessarily have like set like meditation time. I'm not,
Mm-hmm.
for me, meditation is not really my thing. I don't love doing it.
Yeah.
But sometimes I just like to sit and and I'll just reflect on the day. I'll just let whatever things are popping into my head. I don't have any specific questions. I just like, I can have a busy mind, and I just let my mind go all over the place thinking about different things. And I find it's almost like mental flossing, like, the same with your, like, teeth. Like, for me, at the end of the day, particularly if I've had a busy day that has had a lot of stimulation and things going on, I need a certain amount of time where I'm just sitting and I'm letting my mind get flossed, and I'm thinking through. And I think when you're thinking about your growth journey, whether it's uncertainty or more broadly, I think you need to build in a reflection practice that works for you. I've shared what works for me. For every person, it's different. Some people, it's going to be really structured journaling. Some people are going to do meditating. There's no right or wrong answer to it. So that's the first really important part, is build in a reflection practice that works for you.
Mm.
The second is to get feedback and advice from other people. I think we all have our blind spots. It is really important to get feedback from mentors, from friends, from peers on how you're doing, on how you're evolving. We are fundamentally a very flawed species in the sense that we have a lot of cognitive biases. Like, humans are extremely irrational creatures. And certainly there's certain really irrational things that I have proposed or done that then people have pointed out to me, like, that doesn't make any sense, Scott. Like, why are you doing that? And I'm like, thank you so much. Like, it was helpful to get this external perspective to warn me about something that was like irrational.
Mm-hmm.
And Daniel Kahneman, the great Nobel Prize winning economist slash kind of psychologist, he talks a lot about that like, he studied all of these cognitive biases that he has, and that really one of the main ways that you can learn to control these cognitive biases is, yes, you can become aware of what are the standard ones out there, planning fallacy, etc. But it's really developing relationships with other people so that they can point out to you the cognitive biases, and then you can say thank you, and then incorporate that into your own life. So I talk about this a little bit in the book, but I think getting regular feedback and advice from other people is really critical for your growth journey.
Yeah, I'm going to build upon that point even a little bit more. Is that there's an article that was for a body of research by a lady, organizational psychologist, Tasha Eurich. She did an article for the Harvard Business Review, and I actually spoke with these young professionals just yesterday about this. Is this self-awareness is that 95% of us believe that we are self-aware, and it turns out the data shows it's more like 10 to 15% of us are actually self-aware, and it's a frightening gap. Like when you think of it, is that significant? But where I'm going here is that you're giving us the very solution to that issue. Like, you know, we think we have this awareness of self. We are so sure of how we're showing up, or the thoughts that we're having, or the ideas that are going to serve us. And just to simply have a few connections in our life that are good at putting up the mirror sometimes and saying, hey, I know you think this is coming from a really rational place, but let me help you see that this is maybe more emotive, that this may be a little irrational, that this may be coming from a bias, and you're just not seeing it. And here's the thing, that there's nothing wrong with you if you're doing that. That's a real, as you're alluding to, this is such a human innate quality that we all have, and it just requires a ton of work. And that's something I just want to really emphasize here, is that nothing that you're positioning here to us, while I believe it is easy to incorporate in terms of the adaptability to it and the perfecting it, if you want to use a word as that, even though we may never actually perfect it, this idea is that everything that you're presenting to us here, Scott, is just consistent work that I don't think ever goes away, right?
No, it's the work that never ends. And
Yeah.
I just sent out a mass email newsletter yesterday, and in it I quote this book from Scott Harris, I think this, or Scott Harrison. He's the founder of charity Water, and in it, in his memoir, he has a line where he says, "The most important work is the work that has no end."
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that relates to growth, to personal development, to building a better relationship with uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
And it's important for listeners, especially perfectionistic listeners, who sometimes think that there's like a mission accomplished,
Right.
and that, oh, I have now achieved my perfect state. And it's important to recognize, like, there is no perfect state. I think even in the context of like different religious philosophies, it's interesting to apply in the context of this,
Mm-hmm.
in the context of like Christianity and original sin, and kind of um, how people, if someone is Christian, how they think about it. Also to think in the context of, outside of theology, of like personal like development. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we are all flawed, we are all works in progress, and there is no perfect. We all are just trying to be better versions of ourselves. And I share that just because I think that if someone is religious, it's an interesting kind of context to think about. And it doesn't just apply to Christian faith, it can apply to other faiths as well. But I think it's interesting when you think about it in the context of your personal development, particularly if you have perfectionistic tendencies.
And yeah, I really appreciate you mentioning that, because I think that is such a almost like calling it like a guilty pleasure of those of us that are all chasing growth, is like we want to be perfect. Deep down, we try to push away, like, I know I can't be perfect, but then if you're being really honest with yourself, those standards that you're holding yourself accountable to at times, it's pretty much perfectionism, and that's when that first pillar is so important, that self-compassion of just, if go ahead and compare yourself to perfectionism, that's fine. It's really okay, and I've been guilty of it enormous amounts of time throughout my life. Just don't be so damn harsh on yourself when you're not getting there. Like, find a way, set that goal, don't worry about, like, that's fine. If you need to do that, do it. But so much of what we're speaking to here is that there's too many things that are out of our control for that perfectionism to occur. And this whole theme throughout our conversation around uncertainty, at the end of the day, that's what we have to acknowledge, is that if we can't control everything, which we can't, nobody can, how can we ever truly be certain? And so if we can never find true certainty, how do we therefore, now to go back to everything that you set us up to talk about today, how do we embrace the uncertainty? How do we just get more comfortable in that world of uncertainty? And I'd love to move there with you now, in terms of just when you now look at the body of work you've done with Venture for Canada over these 12 years, like, what have you seen in terms of the results that help you see so much of what we're talking about obviously works? Like, what have been some of those just true success stories over that time, where you can see, hey, when we start using that risk-taking muscle more consistently, this is what we can expect to maybe start to experience?
There are many different examples that come to mind. I can think of an alumni named Charlie Feng, who he joined VFC when he had a venture that had some challenges, and he went into Venture for Canada as kind of a career like reset, and to kind of meet a community of other entrepreneurial people.
Hmm.
And through VFC, he ended up working at a company called Clearco, which ended up having challenges later, but at its peak was worth over $1 billion. It was a unicorn company. He was one of the co-founders of the company. He has gone on to found other ventures and had a ton of professional success. And the thing I see in Charlie is a consistent embrace of risk taking
Hmm.
and of being willing to make big bets. And I think that that's really correlated a lot with success in life. And there are many other examples that I can think of another alumni from Venture for Canada, Josh McIntyre, who joined Grammarly when it was a much smaller company. I think when it was like 70 or 80 employees. He grew with it to until very recently, just like I think he just announced he was leaving like a month ago. So he was there like 8 or 9 years and ended up running a big chunk of the revenue operations team. And he moved to San Francisco for this job, and yeah, has had a ton of professional success and bet on a potential rocket ship that became a true rocket ship. So in the earliest start of your career, I think it's really important to make big bets with the context that it's easier to make big bets if you have a degree of stability financially in terms of kind of relationships. And for listeners, because I don't want to just blanket say take lots of risks, because somebody might say, well, I have no money, and
Right.
or like easy for you to say like, um, but what I think is important is first set up a foundation of stability for yourself, ideally certain kind of baseline savings, kind of core social network to be able to support you.
Hmm.
And once you have that in place, I think it's a lot easier for you to take risks later on. And the more that you take smart risks, the more that you make big bets, the more that you're positioned to capitalize on the uncertainty that exists out there in the world.
Yeah, and I think just to piggyback on that term risk as well, it the way our minds look at something like risk, it's not as it's not always a comes in the form of a bet. It's not always going to come in the form of some sort of you just deciding to let go of some money or go without money. Risk can also come in the form of just stepping into something knowing that you can fail. Like
Yeah.
that in itself is a risk, and I see that in every aspect of life. I've seen it in my years coming from the world of sport, like athletes that for whatever reason they refrain from committing to too big of a goal because the risk of actually not getting to that goal was too much for them to bear. They didn't want to know that they failed. They'd rather set a smaller goal for themselves so they can achieve it and then look back and be like, look, I didn't fail. And it's like, well, yeah, but you could have gone bigger, to use that term bet. You could have bet bigger on yourself. And hey, if you'd not gotten there, you still may have gotten a heck of a lot further simply because you aspired for something greater. And I think that, and this comes from just we've talked about economic theories, prospect theory, risk aversion theories, kind of how it's evolved over the years. But I think that's what's so important is that we look at something like risk as like, I have to put something in literally, tangibly into this in order to show that I'm making a risk. And sometimes it's just simply a commitment to yourself. Like that can be the risk. I've decided that I'm now going to do more of XYZ. And by doing that, it means that I'm taking a risk and I'm committing to a version of myself that is significantly greater. And I hear that in those two examples that you gave of those alumni is that, yes, financially, I'm sure there were some decisions they had to make. But at the same time, whether it be the company that they were a part of or the version of themselves they were committing to, they saw something much bigger than the current state and decided, I'm going to take a gamble on this. I'm going to risk and say, I'm putting myself in a position to be part of something that's going to potentially be so much greater in the future. Finances or no finances, this is just about me simply saying, I see the potential and I'm going to go for it. Right.
I agreed. And if you don't believe in yourself, no one else is going to. And
Mm,
I think part of life is having, or I think part of doing great things is having high expectations for yourself in a healthy way, in
yeah.
a way that you recognize you're going to fail along the way, but that you believe in your potential to do really, really like great things.
Mm,
And most people are going to tell you you can't do it or you're not going to achieve what you set out. But it is really important to have, I think, high expectations for yourself if you're going to do amazing like things in this world. And I think one other point that's really important to share is that when it comes to risk taking, I think a lot of people fall into this like myth of the one big risk, that there's one huge decision that is going to shake their life. And in reality, it is often many little decisions, thousands or tens of thousands over a lifetime that shape our lives. And I think that that's a really helpful paradigm. And Stikhinder Cassidy, the CEO of Xero, the cloud accounting software company, has a great book called Choose Possibility, where she talks about this like subject. And she thinks, and maybe it's her core thesis in that book, is that a lot of people refrain from risk taking because they put all their eggs in one basket in their mind, and they think this one risk is going to determine my life.
Yeah.
And her paradigm, which I think is really helpful, is that it is very rarely one big risk that determines our life. It's rather thousands of mid-sized risks. And I think the more that you shift to that paradigm, the more that you become comfortable with risk taking, because you don't put so much pressure on that one decision. You don't overthink things.
Yeah. Yeah. And for me, like that's the part of the process with that anti-fragility part of the foundational pillars. It's just like this notion of if we're willing to just practice and see risk as these small actions, these small decisions each and every day, we then get to see how we're getting better. And suddenly now that's what we're getting. We're taking the risk.
Yes.
We're becoming less fragile because we're now looking at all the data behind us. I mean, like, wow, look at all those tens of hundreds of risks that I've taken in the last 2 or 3 years. Had I not framed them as risks, then I probably wouldn't notice the way in which I'm strengthening that muscle and the ways I'm getting better.
Totally. And it's that recognition that the more that you take small risks, that you over time begin to make much bigger bets.
Right.
You can start with little side hustles or taking little risks in your job, and eventually that can turn into going full time and building something
Mm-hmm.
and taking big risks in building that venture. Your ability to build your risk taking muscles can really increase over time. And likewise, your ability to build your uncertainty muscles, which are
Mm-hmm.
very interrelated to risk-taking muscles, can also be developed. The great thing is that learning to cope and learning to thrive with uncertainty is a teachable skill. And as I've done talks about my book, The Uncertainty Advantage, with folks across North America, one of the things I have seen firsthand is that our relationship with uncertainty can ebb and flow over time. So there's sometimes certain moments in our life where we're really good at managing risk-taking, at managing uncertainty. And there's other moments, let's say when someone's in more poor mental health, where they become really paralyzed by uncertainty. And that's important also to think of in the context of risk-taking um, uncertainty kind of coping,
Mm-hmm.
is that just because you might be challenged right now in terms of your risk-taking muscles, in terms of your uncertainty, doesn't mean that you're set for the rest of your life. That it's important to have a growth mindset and to recognize, yeah, right now I'm not that good at dealing with uncertainty and risk-taking, but I can get better at it. And
Yeah.
like many things, I think you have a growth mindset when it comes to risk-taking. You are going to become much better at risk-taking in the long term.
Yeah. No, I love it. And at one place I really wanted to just finish this on as well. It's just the power of community, and obviously you've built that with VFC, and you speak about it as one of those pillars of the professional networking. And I would love for you just to give us some examples of the power of, or at least just one example of the power of how community has played a part in the success of these individual outcomes, these individual stories. You gave us a couple of those insights, but why it is that we need to be seeking community and the power, therefore, of what a community can do, whether it be our network or whether it be those that we're around every single day.
The Harvard Happiness Project was a study where they tracked the happiness of folks from JFK's Harvard class over the span of around 70 years. And in that research, they found that the biggest correlation between your happiness in life and anything else was the extent to which you had quality relationships with other people. And it's important to think about relationship building, relationship kind of maintenance, spending time with other people as an essential part of self-care. And Derek Thompson, the writer of The Atlantic and author of Abundance, he also has been writing a lot recently about the decline of partying in the United States and how Americans party way less than they did 20 or 30 years ago. There's way fewer social events, and the impact that that has on well-being, on emotional health. And for listeners, I think it's important to think about community as an essential part of thriving in uncertainty, because in an uncertain world, a lot can go wrong. Think of where you're in Louisiana, where a lot of people can have uncertainty in terms of flooding and of
Yeah.
hurricanes. And every hurricane season is probably quite stressful for a lot of people in Louisiana, especially with the context of Hurricane Katrina and some of the past challenges. And it's important to think about how when you invest in building a community, that community can help you in those really tough times,
Right.
but also helps you in the good times. That
Mm.
all the research points that if you want to have a happy and fulfilling life, invest in community building, invest in building relationships. Now, to grind it back to Venture for Canada, what I've seen firsthand is the power of community in action across our various initiatives. There have been many people who've gotten married through Venture for Canada. They met participants. They've had children through Venture for Canada. They founded businesses through Venture for Canada. They found best friends through Venture for Canada. And one of the most joyful parts of my time in building Venture for Canada has been seeing this phenomenal community. We do
Yeah.
community roundtable dinners where we bring together our different community members together over food to talk around different topics. And when I think about why Venture for Canada was been able to raise $80 million and get all the support, I think it's partially because we really embrace community building as an essential part of our organization. So to wrap things up for a listener, I think it's really important that you invest time in relationships with other people, that you show up for friends, that you cut back the screen time and you spend more time with like actual real people. You host more parties. And the more that you do those things, the more that I think you're both going to have a successful career and you're going to have a successful life. And I'll share a final, just personal example is that
Yeah.
my grandparents are almost 94
Mm.
and they are both extremely cognitively healthy. They live in their own house. My grandfather still works a fair amount, and they have like an extremely voracious social life.
Mm-hmm.
They have people over like 3 or 4 times like a week for
Yeah.
parties.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people of that generation did that.
Yeah.
And I think my grandparents are quite happy people because the quality of their relationships are really high. And I couldn't, emphasize this more of invest in relationships, invest in community, and think about tangible things you can do to build deep relationships with people in your life,
Yeah.
but also to build relationships with a broader set of people. I know a lot of people in a lot of geographies. So what I did was create an email newsletter where I send out my top kind of reflections and sort of life updates once a month to like
Yeah.
1,400 people.
Hmm.
And it's been great. I hear from so many different random people who I normally wouldn't have the time. It's hard I can't have one-on-one coffee catch-ups with 1,400 people on
Right.
a regular basis. But the email newsletter has been a really effective way for me to build a more personal bond with
Mm.
large number of people, some of whom I know really well, but others who are more acquaintances.
Sure. Sure. Gosh, the word I appreciated most, I appreciated all of that you shared, and I think it's so important for us to hear for such a variety of reasons. But you use the word maintenance in when it comes to relationships, and it shows the need for us to be conscious and deliberate and intentional around the work that goes in to the relationship. Whether you look at it from a networking standpoint, if you're only networking to get something out for yourself, you're not going to be very successful networking. What are you bringing to those relationships? What are you bringing to those other people that, for all you know, may be there for the exact same reason? So good luck getting anything from anyone whose reason for networking is also to get anything from, stuff from other people too. And so you're suddenly now in this locking match with somebody else where neither of you are willing to give, but both of you want to take. And that's where you can find yourself. So be the giver, be the person that's bringing something to that network. People are going to notice that. The other part of it too that I think is so important is you mentioned, yes, they're going to be there to pick you up, but they're also going to be there for your successes as well. That's something that community has done for me that I desperately, desperately needed. I did not need any help in knowing when I did stuff wrong. I was always the first person to be like, Steve, you screwed up. You got to figure this out. But I was terrible at acknowledging when I actually did something good and when I was successful. And my wife has been incredible for me in that world for the last 9 years. She's just time and time again, Steve, you want to just acknowledge that you've actually done something pretty great here? And I'm like, yeah, maybe. And that muscle was terrible when we first met. And it's gotten a lot better now where I'm now around more people that will say, Steve, that was amazing, or Steve, you did something great. And whether I receive it very uncomfortably, which I still do, I think it's a British thing. I think we don't do well with compliments, sadly. But at the same time, the fact is we need to hear that. We need people who are in our corner saying, you did great work. I am so excited for you. We should go and celebrate. Like that. That is what we need. That is what makes us, as you say, happy, truly happy in this world. I love that we've had this opportunity to chat for so many reasons, Scott, but for the fact that we're actually leaving it on that point of just encouraging folks to get out more, to sit down more, to meet with people more, to bring people into your home more in this time where all the reasons are to stay at home by yourself, watching TV, all the options on your phone. We need to push back against that. We need to be the example for others that, we want to see in this world. And so I just appreciate so much of what you provided here. And before you go, though, I want to make sure that we can learn as much as we can possibly learn, either about you, the book, and of course, VFC, if anybody wants to just go and read a little bit more into this, the work that you're doing there. Where can we find all that information?
In terms of Venture for Canada, you can find more information at ventureforcanada.ca or ventureforcanada.com, and lots of background on our programs and the work that we do. In terms of me and my book, you can check out The Uncertainty Advantage on Amazon.com. It is coming out on September 16th in the United States. It came out on August 19th in Canada, and excited to share it is #1 in the careers category of Amazon.ca right now.
Amazing.
It's actually #2 in the business decision-making category, which is actually pretty competitive one. So I'm excited to share that it is doing quite well on Amazon in Canada. And you can also learn more about me by checking out my Substack, where I send a monthly email out to 1,400 people, and with some of the best kind of articles and kind of recommendations and things that I've seen over the last month and my thoughts on uncertainty. And finally, you can learn more about me by checking out my website, which is sti2rs.com. And on my website, there is a little quiz called the Uncertainty Quiz. And it gives you a score of 0 to 48 on what is your comfort level with uncertainty. And I think one of the first steps of learning to develop a better relationship with uncertainty is understanding what is your current relationship with it. So, Steve, I have really enjoyed this conversation. You asked great questions, and I completely agree on the closing note of community. We live in a world with a lot of distractions and a lot of pressure on us, and it can be hard to prioritize time for relationships. But in an uncertain world, it is more important than ever to lean into maintaining relationships. And to your point, it takes work, it takes dedication, and it takes intention.
Yeah, absolutely. Love it. And hey, maybe we've captured a few more folks in their 20s to help with my demographics today when you send this out to your VFC people. But at the same time, Scott, everything you just said, the feeling is mutual. I appreciate it. And I now have a test to go take on stirrett.com. I'm looking forward to seeing just how well I handle uncertainty. But all that information is going to be in our show notes. Once again, Scott, thank you so much for the time today, brother. Best of luck with everything in your world moving forwards.
Thank you.
And my thanks again to Scott for joining us on the show today. There's a specific part of the conversation that I want to highlight, but something that Scott and I were actually talking about off air before I get to that, as we wrapped up recording, was that this was much more of an academic, research-oriented conversation, something that we typically don't get into the weeds with, but I really think it was important today for us to do that for a variety of reasons, one of which I want to go into now. The way in which Scott was able to just reinforce the notion of the risk-taking muscle through some of the research that he suggested allows us to understand just how normal our inability to embrace risk is. We're incredibly human when it comes to that. We're not supposed to be running towards risk. We weren't put on this planet to do that, and we haven't evolved in a way to do that more effectively. The fact is, it's a muscle that must be trained. It's a muscle that must be practiced, and there's ways to do it effectively. But it starts by just simply acknowledging, in my opinion, what is risk? Look at your world right now. What is risk in your world? What could that look like? What could a small step, as Scott alluded to, be that you could take that would allow you to take a step toward risk? Just to simply show yourself that you are, in fact, capable of taking a risk. We only figure this stuff out by trying. But let's not make this an elephant-sized decision when really it's tiny. What is one small thing in your life right now that would show that you're willing to take a risk? And what will you learn by taking that risk? How could you benefit? And how could you see the need to realize that benefit and use that as your catalyst to then take the step, take the risk? So I hope you all appreciated the conversation as much as I did, but at the same time, let's be a little bit more risk-taking. Let's be a bit more assertive when it comes to leaning into this uncertainty that Scott gave us so much great insight around. But in the meantime, folks, as always, I appreciate you taking the time to listen. If you're new to the show, don't let this be the one and only time that you're listening. Make sure you subscribe, go back, listen to a whole bunch of other episodes. It's a great reason to download some content for some upcoming travel maybe, or for some meaningful car rides to and from work where you can continue to grow and develop yourself. As always, too, be sure to leave a rating. And I just want to thank you for consistently showing up and listening to the show. But in the meantime, best of luck with anything and everything you have going on in your world. And I look forward to doing this again with you very soon. Bye for now.
Thank you for tuning in to Growth Ready. If you liked what you heard and are feeling ready to grow, be sure to leave a 5-star rating, subscribe to the show, and share the episode with someone you know is ready to fuel their growth journey today. We love our community, so don't hesitate to reach out to us at podcast@growthready.com. And until next time, we are Growth Ready, and you will be too.